Hi, my name is Glenn O'Bear. I'm the Research Development and Innovation Director with Exacto. Today I'm talking to PJ Liesch, who's the director of the UW-Madison Insect Diagnostic Lab, also known as the Wisconsin Bug Guy. PJ, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here today, Glenn.
Well, so PJ, you and I go way back. We went to grad school around the same time and had the same advisor. So I know you on a personal scale, but can you tell anybody else listening, tell us about yourself a little bit, your background, how you kind of got your way into this field, and then how you wound up in this position in that office that you're in right now.
Sure. So I'm a Wisconsin native. I grew up in southeastern Wisconsin, a little town called Franksville in Racine County. Not on a farm, but next to your stereotypical Wisconsin dairy farm, and we had a pond in the yard. So I grew up spending a lot of time outside catching frogs and salamanders, fireflies, things like that. So I always just grew up with an interest in kind of science and biology. My dad was a middle school technology education teacher, so was always interested in the science technology side of things. But spending a lot of time outdoors around our pond in our yard, but then also was a little bit older, we started spending our summers in northern Wisconsin. So I would be around the bogs, around the lakes, hiking through the woods, just looking for things in rotting logs and under rocks and all that good stuff. So that really solidified my interest in wildlife and animals and things like that. I wasn't necessarily specifically interested in insects per se, but I got into high school, had just a really enthusiastic, great biology teacher that solidified the biology interest. Then when I went to college at UW Parkside down in Kenosha County, I knew from day one I wanted to be a biology major. And along the way, my interest in insects was growing. And when I was in my second year of college, I got linked up with Dr. Chris Williamson, who was our graduate advisor. And at that time, the invasive emerald ash borer was not in Wisconsin yet. So I did 2 summers as an intern looking for any evidence of emerald ash borer in southeastern Wisconsin. Didn't find it at the time. It wasn't until 2008 that it was detected in the state, but that really got my foot in the door and really solidified my interest in entomology. That led to me coming to graduate school and working with Dr. Williamson. After that, when I finished my master's degree, went on to work as a research technician, both with Chris Williamson in entomology and also at the time Dr. Jim Kearns in plant pathology, doing turf grass and ornamental research. A lot of great hands-on experience doing that. I really enjoyed it. And then after about 3, 4 years, the gentleman who was running the diagnostic lab here, Phil Pelletieri, he ran it for 35, 36, 37 years. He was retiring, and I was interested in the position, got it on an interim basis, went through the full interview process. And so I've been in the lab here for a little over a decade now, since March of 2014. So that's where I came from and how I got to where I am now.
That's great. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do then in your current position? What's it been like the past decade?
Yeah, it's definitely a fun job. If I could, have kind of drafted up a dream job for myself, it probably would be something along these lines. I get to do a lot of fun stuff, and really I find it rewarding. Just the fact that I get to help so many people. And the main thing that I do is running the diagnostic lab here and providing diagnostics for folks. So what that means in a nutshell is anyone in Wisconsin and sometimes outside of the state too can reach out to me with that insect or related arthropod they've maybe found in their home or in their yard or garden, or it could be a farmer that finds something in their crop fields and they just don't know what it is. Is it a good insect? Is it a bad one? If it's a bad one, what can you do about it? That sort of thing. So I help them figure out what it is and then point them in the right direction for management advice. In some cases, I have colleagues that maybe work in a particular crop system. I've got a colleague that works in specifically vegetable crops or fruit crops or field crops. And so I will, link and loop those folks in because they really have the expertise in terms of how to best specifically manage those pests in those systems. But I interact a lot with the general public and also some of the key industries in the state related to like turf grass and ornamental tree care. So landscapers, nurseries, arborists, turf care professionals. those groups, and also the structural pest control realm. So exterminators, I interact a lot with them. So I provide diagnostic services, provide some management advice. I also do a lot of science communication and outreach and things like media interviews. I typically do maybe 30 to 40 of those in a given year whenever some sort of insect issue or topic pops up in the state.
Got it. And so are you part of UW Extension?
I am, yeah. I'm based. I'm in my office here on the UW-Madison campus. So I'm based in Madison at UW-Madison, but I have a split appointment on paper. I'm technically 75% extension and then 25% here on campus in CALS, the College of Agricultural and Life Sciences. And so that has kind of a teaching component to it, but 75% extension appointment.
Can you talk a little bit about just what is extension and how does that service through the university? How does it support citizens and professionals? You alluded to it a little bit that you work with all those people, but how is that structured? How does that work?
Yeah, so Extension itself, it's a big organization with a lot of different, branches and areas that they work in. If you think about it in very broad senses, we've all probably heard of programs like 4-H for kids groups. That's through extension. So they really do a lot of different things. The main realm that I work in, I'm in a group called the Agriculture Institute. And so we interact with, agricultural producers and our horticulture team falls within there as well. And so one of the main things we do and kind of my day-to-day work and a lot of my colleagues is really providing some science-based answers and information to folks around the state. I mean, if you find an insect or you have some sort of problem in your yard or your house, be it plant related or just you got a leaky faucet or something or wires aren't working, folks will hop online and there's a lot of bad information online and some of it can be not the best. Some of it might not hurt you in the long run, but if you're trying to figure out how to do your own home wiring, that's not a great idea. And so again, what Extension does is it really helps folks around Wisconsin. We've got this thing called the Wisconsin idea that campus shouldn't just be pigeonholed here, just doing its own thing. It should take the knowledge that is generated here and get that out to residents of the state. And so that's a key thing that Extension does is provide this evidence-based, science-based information to help people in their everyday lives. So I mentioned I interact a lot with the general public, home gardeners, just homeowners that maybe find insects like ants in their kitchen and what can they do about it. For example, interact a lot with agricultural producers as well, be it vegetables or fruit or field crops or specialty crops and so on. So again, in my realm, it's helping those folks. Specifically, I help with the diagnostics and helping with management or pointing them and getting them in touch with colleagues. But it all ties back to the evidence-based aspect. And I have a lot of colleagues that also are doing research to help better inform and also kind of push the boundaries of science and figure out new and novel ways of fixing issues when they pop up. So it's really exciting to work within that network.
Great. Do other states have extension programs that are similar? And I mean, do all 50 states have it? Do certain states have it? Just what does it look like across the nation?
Yeah, so other states do have extension services and programs. There can be a lot of variability from state to state just based on how those programs and efforts are funded. Some states are going to have really large, robust systems, and other states it might be a little bit smaller. But again, all the states are doing some of these same efforts. They have some of these core aspects of their mission to help residents in the state, be it farmers or the general public or someone else.
Got it. I'm curious about Wisconsin, specifically thinking about the diversity and geography and kind of climate zones that we have. Do you work with cases all the way up in northern Wisconsin, all the way down to, southeastern, southwestern Wisconsin? What is that like, and what kind of how does that diversity work? I'm curious what that's like here and then versus other states.
Yeah, great question. So, like in my day-to-day work, I keep some statistics and records in terms of who I've helped, where they're located, that sort of thing. And in most years, I am handling cases and helping folks from pretty much every county in the state or close to it. And in Wisconsin, we've got 72 counties. So I do get samples from just about every corner and county of the state. As you could imagine, I do get a lot from parts of the state with higher population. So I get a lot from Dane County, where Madison is, and the Milwaukee, Waukesha metro area, kind of the Fox River Valley, Oshkosh up to Green Bay, and locations like that. But again, I do help folks all around the state. It kind of depends on like your position with extension. So for me specifically, I have statewide responsibilities, and each extension system is modeled a bit differently. And even within extension here in Wisconsin, we have some folks that are maybe county based and they're working specifically within their one county, or they might be multi county and work within two, three, four close counties or kind of regional, if you will. And then we have, again, specialists that are working and answering questions and helping people statewide. So other states will have somewhat similar structures in that you may have kind of statewide experts working on things. You might have folks working at more of a regional or local level as well.
That's really interesting. So you see a lot. What are some of the current and kind of emerging challenges or trends that you're seeing, over the past 10 years? You talked about emerald ash borer a little bit as one example. What else should we be looking for out there?
Yeah, that's an interesting topic. I could probably go on for about 2 hours on that. I mean, just to kind of set the stage. So in Wisconsin, we think we have somewhere in the ballpark of about 20,000 or so insect species. And so there's always something new that folks just haven't seen before. We also have new things showing up on a regular basis. Just in the last decade that I've been in the diagnostic lab, I've probably seen 20 or more new non-native insects show up. So there's always some getting in. That might be one, two, three new things a year. Some of the new insects come in and they might be either a very minor pest and they aren't really much of a concern. Sometimes they get in and they really don't do much in terms of harm to the ecosystem at all. Other ones come in and maybe they just can't survive here and they kind of fall on their face and we never see them again. But every once in a while, you get a big new significant pest that comes in. So just in the last, about 20-ish years, that was emerald ash borer. One that's been around longer than that is now called spongy moth, but had previously been called gypsy moth. That one's been around for decades, but it ebbs and flows. And so just in the last about 3 to 5-ish years, we have had some outbreaks here in Wisconsin. That's been really problematic for a wide range of folks, from homeowners with oak trees in their yard or aspen trees or something like that, all the way up to folks that manage large swaths of forests or woodlots, that sort of thing. So there's always different insect trends every single year. And usually once a year, I give a seminar just on what are the trends that I've seen. So there's always something new. There's kind of winners and losers, if you will, every year. And it's hard to predict, but it's really interesting to watch things like the weather, which I feel play a really critical role in some of the patterns that we see in a given year. So that's always a challenge, is just trying to figure out, what are we seeing, what's going to pop up and emerge next. In some cases, we are at a little bit of an advantage here in Wisconsin, because when new invasive species of insects show up, it's usually not right in the middle of the country. It's usually a coast, West Coast or East Coast. And so if they show up there first and we see and watch and say, oh, that one's causing a lot of problems in the ecosystem, that allows us to prepare a little bit. Sometimes, though, things can move very, very quickly. There's a new insect that just showed up this year, 2024, in July. It was detected right around the 4th of July, called elm zigzag sawfly. And within about a month, we had detected it in about almost 20 different Wisconsin counties. So that one went from 0 to 60 just like that. So sometimes things pop up really quickly. Other times we know it'll come here eventually, but that's always really interesting and fascinating in my position. Some other challenges just in general, when I think of entomology, we're hearing more and more about pollinator declines and also just insect declines, period. And insects play so many critical roles in the ecosystem, base of food webs for birds and fish and other things like that. Pollinators doing pollination. So that's really important agriculturally and for other plants. We have just insects that are kind of nature's recyclers, if you will. And so we've been hearing more and more, and there's a building body of evidence that there's declines going on. And that's really concerning to me. And so I think we're going to hear more and more about that in the coming years and really decades during our lifetimes.
Got it. Something that we've been involved with is the ongoing work around the Endangered Species Act and the insecticide strategy that's being drafted. They also have a herbicide strategy, but we've looking at the idea of buffer zones and protecting those species that are at risk. And so yeah, a lot of our research has been around drift reduction, for example, like making sure that what you apply goes where it's intended and doesn't get into those areas. So that's I can appreciate what you're saying, and it's an
Yeah.
area that we focused a lot too. Yeah,
Yeah.
great. So I'm curious. I mean, thinking about how we pull in information and thinking about, I just imagine, you're in your office, but you're like a hub where tons and tons of really data points are coming in about what insects are out there and where they're coming from. Um, Is there some aspect of is that being folded into research on insect distribution, citizen science? Like how is that all coming together? How do you collaborate with people to kind of support those efforts?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that essentially goes on, and as you mentioned, I think that was a really good concept you brought up. That in a way, I serve as kind of a hub, so interact with colleagues in my department, and if I know a colleague is kind of waiting or watching for a specific insect to pop up to be able to conduct research trials, I can, if I know to have it on my radar, I can certainly let them know when it pops up so that they can most efficiently go about and conduct whatever sort of research studies they're trying to do. So that's one way that I do it. An example along those lines, I have a colleague, Dr. Susan Paskowitz, who is our medical entomologist. And so, if I'm seeing weird tick species pop up, I can let her know about that so that she can incorporate it into her research. Maybe if I hear of sites that just have a lot of tick activity or mosquito activity or something like that, let her know about that for her research team to work on. So that's one key way that I'm kind of integrated into this. I do also dabble in a little bit of research, and I said earlier I've got an appointment which is 75% extension, 25% teaching. I don't have any sort of formal research appointment, but from time to time I do dabble with a little bit of research with collaborators from around the state or elsewhere. I've published a couple of papers in the last decade on just some kind of neat basic science things related to like dragonflies and aquatic insects. This last year, we had our big emergence of periodical cicadas in Wisconsin, which happens once every 17 years. So that was such a cool, amazing natural phenomenon to see. And as part of that, I created a website for periodical cicadas in Wisconsin. It was a fun project to work on, but I dug through about 150 or so years of newspaper articles, old government records to better improve our map of where those cicadas actually occur in Wisconsin. And then I said, let's take it a step further and create a citizen science project where folks can submit their sightings. And we ended up discovering some what I thought were pretty cool things, showing that they were indeed present in spots where we just didn't know if they even occurred there. So there's some things like that that allow me to plug in with the research. So I'm still taking some of that and hoping to write it up at some point. But it's a really fun, position, again, serving as that hub, and I get to interact with a lot of different folks.
I love the idea that just I'm thinking about your roots kind of getting into biology as a kid, right? And like the experience of just being a citizen, right? And we're all surrounded by insects all the time, right? And biology more broadly. And then we kind of this other part of what we do at Exacto and where you're producing food or turf or it's more in the professional realm, but I think your job is really fascinating and how it pulls together that kind of fundamental experience of just being a citizen around surrounded by the natural world, and then at the same time you're helping people we produce food and economic outcomes, and so and then, yeah, I'm imagining what kid is out there going through that same experience and how you're talking about citizen science. How can you enable that excitement for the next generation and kind of, that makes me think about the future, 10 to 20 years from now, 50 years from now. Like, what's it going to look like? What's your job going to look like? You said you found how many, 20 new species in the last 10 years, or you've seen that coming in? What does it look like 50 years from now?
Yeah, oh gosh, I wish I had my perfect, crystal ball to look into. A lot of things are really going to be interesting. And one area that excites me at the moment, there's a lot of research, all over the place going into computer learning, AI, that sort of technology. And I think that's really going to keep pushing forward for my specific line of work. A couple of ways that's going to relate to me. I mean, I think we're going to see great improvements in terms of the diagnostic capabilities of some of these tools. I mean, there are smartphone apps you can use pointed at insects or plants or other creatures to help identify them. And some of those are really quite good and fun to play with, but I do see them make errors on a regular basis. And the caveat is if you don't know that that app is making an error, and it's just way up here, you can really kind of, get off target, so to speak. So I think we're going to see improvements with that sort of thing. I also have a number of colleagues in the department that are doing some really cool stuff with some of the technologies, using computers to analyze things really in depth. These are things that we couldn't even really think about 10 or 20 or 50 years ago, like watching bees with cameras and training the computer to figure out what they're doing and how much time they spend on various tasks and things like that. So I think there's some really exciting stuff there. I think that's going to, again, help with things like diagnostics, might also help with some of the scouting efforts. Along those lines, I have a colleague, Dr. Emily Bick, who's working on a device called the Insect Eavesdropper. And this is basically an acoustic device, and she specializes in field crop settings. So imagine you have a device you could attach to like a corn plant, and it's basically listening for insect activity. And each insect is going to have a slightly different sound it makes. And these are sounds that you and I just cannot hear. They're very, very subtle, but the vibrations are traveling through the plant. So imagine you could strap a device on a corn plant, and it's going to tell you if there's insect pests present, which ones are present, maybe the number of them that are there. And I could see that being applied to a wide range of other areas. I mean, imagine if you're a turfgrass manager and you could take a device like that and go out to your fairway or somewhere else, stick a probe into the ground, and it could tell you, yeah, there's this density of white grubs present. And that could better inform your management approaches and maybe help you save with your budget in the long run. If you do that and you say, there's a trivial number of grubs here, I can save my money by not treating for those and using those funds elsewhere, that can be a win-win because you are eliminating the use of that pesticide and you're also saving money to use in other regards. Maybe you need new reel mowers or something like that. So I think there's a lot of really exciting directions that we're going to see with some of these technologies and the computer learning side of things going in the future. Also going forward, as you mentioned a moment ago, all these new non-native insects that are showing up. I think we're also going to see, just with shifting climate, I mean, just in the last year or so, the USDA updated their plant hardiness zone. So we saw some of those zones push just into southeastern Wisconsin. Over time, those are just going to continue to push farther northwards. And so there's a lot of insect pests that maybe don't quite occur in Wisconsin, or they occur in the southeast corner of the state, but really rare. But if the climate keeps warming up, I'm going to expect those insects to push their way farther northwards. And so we may be seeing down the road problems or insects that maybe these days are common in places like Southern Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, and not really an issue here. We don't see them much. And those will probably push their way into the state. And so I'm expecting things to kind of shift northward. It's always hard to tell, though, with climate, if we start seeing more variability and more droughts or extreme weather events, what's the impact of that going to be? I think we really need to stay tuned, but there's a lot of potential impacts there. And I think we need a lot of research on that just to understand what will that mean for farmers and growers, but also homeowners and the general public. And, what will that mean for human and animal health too, when you think about insect as vectors of disease? So lots of cool stuff. I've been in my role about a decade. I turned 40 next January, so I'll hopefully be in my position, another 20, 25 years. And so I'm really going to be curious to see what's coming down the road during the course of my career.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. So it sounds like you've seen a lot of really interesting things over time. I'm curious, would you be able to point to, one or two examples? What are some of the most interesting or wild out there cause or diagnosis or scenarios that you've encountered over the past decade or so?
Sure. So one of them was actually just in the last couple of months. Now, I had been contacted and actually had a couple, three cases actually this year in Wisconsin related to scorpions. One was a situation in southeastern Wisconsin. Shipment of bananas had come in. There was a live scorpion in there. Makes sense. We don't have native scorpions here, but human movement, the shipment of bananas and produce makes total sense. But then back in about June or so, I had a situation. A gentleman here in Madison was sitting in his basement watching TV. Something moved, happened to be a live scorpion. Where did that come from? How did it get there? Still don't know for sure. I suspect it must have been human movement. And then I had a third case of that about 2 months ago, kind of mid late summer from Prairie du Chien in southwestern Wisconsin. Again, someone saw something move in their house. It was a live scorpion. It was a species that's really pretty common in like the south central part of the US. But again, how did it get there? Almost certainly through human movement. But again, are these things going to become more common, or is this going to happen more over time with shifting climate? Will scorpions eventually push their way and natively occur in Wisconsin, or move into here? So that's one really interesting thing that I've had not one but three cases of in Wisconsin this year. Probably the weirdest case overall. Every once in a while, I will be contacted by a medical doctor for consultation. Essentially, when there's insects, where short end of the story, there shouldn't be insects. And so one of my weirdest ones was I was contacted by an ophthalmologist or an eye doctor. And they said this patient had presented with, eye irritation and a floater, and they went and did a procedure and they removed an insect specimen, ended up being a first instar botfly larva. So how that ended up inside someone's eye, I mean, the odds of that happening are just so slim, but nonetheless, got to be involved with a really weird case like that. So I maybe get a kind of medical type situation like that once every couple of years, but those are always kind of the X-Files type scenarios that I see. And then, as I mentioned earlier, no 2 years are the same. So there's always some fun stories that are coming out of my lab.
I can imagine that the diagnosis of those cases probably helps a lot in understanding how to treat it. If I saw a scorpion, I'll be honest, I would probably panic and I'd wonder, is it poisonous? Like, how did it get here? And so I'm grateful that extension exists. I'm grateful that you're there in that office. And I'm curious, does that scorpion show up in a Ziploc bag in the mail, or is it a picture, or how does that go?
That one actually came to me live. Someone had put it in a container, so I actually had it in a little enclosure in my lab for a while until it passed away. But it was a lab mate for about a month and a half or so.
Well, I am convinced, I already was convinced before this call, but even more convinced that you have the coolest job in the whole world. So,
It's
um,
definitely fun. No 2 days are the same.
absolutely. So I'm curious, how do people get in touch with you? How do they utilize the services that the diagnostic lab offers? Kind of what are some next steps for anybody listening who's curious?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, I'm always happy to help folks with insect diagnostics, or I should really broaden that a little bit, arthropod diagnostics. I do handle some things like spiders and ticks and centipedes, which aren't technically insects, but close relatives. We kind of lump them all together. But the easiest way to get a hold of me, if you hop online and you do an online search for UW Insect Diagnostic Lab, you'll be able to find my website. I've got all the information on there in terms of how to send in a sample, be it a physical sample or a lot of the time these days, about 60% of the time, it's digital images. Because if you've got, a smartphone that's 8, 10, 12 50 megapixel photo. And a lot of times I can look at that on my screen and really zoom in and blow it up and figure out what something is from that. So again, if you just do a search online for UW Insect Diagnostic Lab, I should be pretty easy to track down.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time today. And again, PJ Liesch, director of the UW Insect Diagnostic Lab. Appreciate your time. Super exciting to hear about what you're working on. And we'll post those resources that you mentioned in a link below this video. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me today, Glenn. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.